Welcome, bienvenidos, benvindu to the Soccermetrics Copa Libertadores Show, a production of Soccermetrics and Soccer Down Here, the only English language podcast devoted to South America's premier club competition. I'm your host, Howard Hamilton, the founder of Soccermetrics. After 8 weeks of group stage play, it's time to take a real pause from Libertadores play and turn our attention to national team competitions. This week, the world's oldest continental competition, the Copa América, will kick off in the USA. In 8 weeks' time, the Copa Libertadores will restart, and the competition will get real with the start of the knockout phase. In the meantime, clubs will refresh and retool, and fans and analysts will reflect and assess. What were the major storylines of this group stage? Who stood out on a team and individual level? And what do the prospects look like for the rest of the summer and the rest of the fall? In this episode, I'll provide my answers to these questions as I review the group stage. But first, a summary of news from around the Libertadores. And there are two news items to summarize. The first is who has qualified for Copa Libertadores 2025. We already know 6 of the teams that will be present for next year's club continental competition. These 6 teams are Club Libertad, who won the Torneo Apertura of Paraguay. They participated in the group stage of this year's competition. Carabobo, who are the first-time winners of the Torneo Apertura in Venezuela. Independiente del Valle, who won the first stage of Ecuador's Liga Pro competition. Estudiantes de La Plata, who won Argentina's Copa de la Liga. San Antonio Bula Bula, who won the Apertura Final in Bolivia. A really great story in which San Antonio were recently promoted to the first division and won the competition at the first attempt. And Atletico Bucaramanga, who won the Torneo Apertura in Colombia and are also a first-time winner of that competition. News item number 2. CONMEBOL sets day and time for the round of 16. CONMEBOL confirmed the dates and times for the round of 16 ties of the Copa Libertadores. Now, these matches for the knockout stages will occur at 2 kickoff time windows. The early kickoff will occur at 6 p.m. Eastern Time in the U.S. So Eastern Time in the U.S. is roughly the same time zone as Santiago, Lima, I believe Caracas. Caracas may still be off by half an hour. And 7 p.m. in Brasilia, Buenos Aires, Rio de Janeiro, and Montevideo. The late kickoff time will be at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time or 9:30 p.m. in Brasilia, Rio, Buenos Aires, and Montevideo. So the first leg matches will occur on 3 dates. On August 13, the early kickoff will be Gremio hosting Fluminense. The late kickoff matches will be San Lorenzo versus Atlético Mineiro and Colo-Colo versus Junior de Barranquilla. On the 14th of August, Peñarol will host the Strongest in the early kickoff, and the late matches, Talleres host River Plate, and Botafogo will host Palmeiras. On the 15th of August, the early match will feature Nacional hosting Sao Paulo, and the late match will see Flamengo host Bolivar in Rio. The second legs will be played on the following dates. On August 20, the early kickoff will see Fluminense play Grêmio. The late kickoff matches feature Atlético Mineiro versus San Lorenzo and Junior versus Colo-Colo. On August 21st, the early kickoff will be the strongest, hosting Peñarol and La Paz. The late kickoff matches see River Plate hosting Talleres and Palmeiras receiving Botafogo in the return. And finally, on the 22nd of August, Sao Paulo will host Nacional in the early match. And the round of 16 will wrap up with Club Bolívar hosting Flamengo in La Paz. That's the end of part 1 of the Soccermetrics Copa Libertadores Show. In part 2, the review of the group stage. Part 2 of the Soccermetrics Copa Libertadores Show, a production of Soccermetrics and Soccer Down Here. Now, let's talk about the group stage that has just concluded. And I think a good place to start is to give a statistical overview of how the group stage shook out. From the 96 matches, there were 241 goals scored, resulting in 51 wins by the home team, 25 away wins, and 20 draws. Now, if you compare that to recent seasons, in 2023, there were 54 home wins in the group stage versus 23 wins by the away team and 19 draws. And if we look back to 2 years ago, in the 2022 Libertadores, there were 48 wins by the home team, 23 wins by the away team, and 25 draws. So the performance of home and away teams in the group stage is roughly in line with the last 2 years. It's closer to 2023 than 2022. And now, if we look at how the goals broke down across the 8 groups, in Group A, there were 22 goals scored, Group B, 29, Group C, 29, Group D, 25, Group E, 36, Group F, 34, Group G, 37, the highest across all 8 groups, and finally Group H with 29 goals scored. Now, the Libertadores, in particularly the last few years, has been seen as the Brasileirão Invitational. If you go back over the history of the competition, Libertadores has been dominated by teams from Argentina, Uruguay, or Brazil. There was a period of time when Brazilian teams put a lower priority on the Libertadores, and the teams that appeared in the competition were not always the strongest, particularly in the late 60s and the 70s. But so it has been a Argentine, Uruguayan dominated competition. But over the last 10 years, particularly the last 7 years, we've seen a level of dominance by Brazilian teams in the competition that we have not seen before by any one country. Now, a lot of the listeners of this podcast are based in North America, and we hear a similar statement about the CONMEBOL club competitions, that they are effectively a Liga MX Invitational. Since River Plate won the Copa Libertadores in 2018, the winners of South America's top club competition have come from Brazil. Now that translates to 6 consecutive winners of the Libertadores from Brazil. The longest streak that any one country has had in the history of the competition. This season, 7 Brazilian clubs qualified for the group stage, and all 7 clubs qualified for the last 16. That's the first time that has ever happened. Now, another thing that has happened for the first time ever is that 2 Bolivian clubs not only advanced to the last 16, they also won their respective groups. Now, this is a product of Bolivian clubs enjoying perhaps the best home advantage in world football, playing in La Paz. But these clubs also performed very well on the road at lower altitudes. And that story deserves to be told. Furthermore, we saw 2 Chilean clubs advance to the last 16. Now, Chilean clubs have had a rough time in Copa Libertadores in recent years. So much to an extent that almost all the Chilean clubs were in the final pot heading to the group stage draw. They were the bottom seeds in their respective groups. So they have 2 clubs from Chile advance to the last 16, and very nearly a third club advance to the last 16 is a huge accomplishment. And lastly, there are no clubs from Paraguay or Ecuador in the last 16. Recent seasons of Libertadores have seen at least one, and sometimes as many as 2 clubs from either Paraguay or Ecuador advance to the competition, advance to the knockout stages of the competition, and even make it to the final 8. That streak was broken this year. So what this retrospective of the group stage is going to look like is that I'm going to step through each group and describe how they look overall and give a qualitative overview of what the top 2 teams did right, and also look at what the advanced metrics have to say. And I also want to start a feature that I call Pour One Out, in which we're going to take a final look at the eliminated sides in the group stage, those teams that finished 3rd and 4th. Now, 3rd place teams will continue to play continental football. They will play in the knockout playoff round of the Copa Sudamericana. But the 4th place teams, they will go no further in continental competition, and they only have their respective domestic competitions to look forward to for the remainder of the year. So let's start with Group A. Group A was a really tight group. 6 of the 12 matches played in Group A ended in draws. The highest number of draws across all of the 8 groups. And of the matches that did not involve Fluminense, 4 of those 6 matches ended in draws. And as I stated in the overview, there were 22 goals in the group, by far the fewest of the 8 groups in the group stage. And it is the only group in which no team accumulated more than 10 expected goals over the 6 group games. So this was a group in which chances were few and far between, goals were at a premium, and more often than not, the result of the match ended in a stalemate. So a win by either side turned out to be almost a definitive result in the course of the group. Now, Fluminense were the runaway winners of the group. They drew the first match. They took over the group after match day 2, and they were never threatened after that point. And they ultimately finished undefeated. Now, if you look at the advanced metrics, Fluminense's advanced metrics reflect the tightness of their group. They were very tight in the front, and they were about average in defense. But the reality for Flu was that they scored the most goals in the group. They scored in every match except one, and they were the only team to score multiple goals more than once. Marquinhos was tied as the top scorer on the team with 2 goals, and he was joined by Marcelo, that European stalwart from who played for so many years at Real Madrid and featured for the Brazilian national team. So it's about the result that we would expect from the current holders of the competition. Fluminense will be joined in the knockout round by Colo-Colo. Now, Colo-Colo were one of the best defenses in the group stage if you look at the expected goals allowed per 90 minutes. Colo-Colo also have one of the better midfields in the competition. You will hear me talk a lot about the midfields of the Brazilian clubs in the group stage, and deservedly so. But I think that Colo-Colo's midfield should not be overlooked. They have players such as Leandro Gil, Gonzalo Castellani, Vicente Pizarro, Esteban Paves, and Carlos Palacios. But the most important player of the Colo-Colo squad is Arturo Vidal. As he goes, Colo-Colo will go. Now, Vidal is a combustible figure, to say the very least. He's already been suspended twice for red cards and accumulated cards in the group stage. If he's able to stay on the field, he will be a key contributor to Colo-Colo as they progress in the knockout rounds. If he's not able to stay on the field, Cacique's chances go down significantly. That said, I think that the best player for Colo-Colo in the group stage has been Carlos Palacios. At 24 years old, he has demonstrated ability, not just in the midfield, but also in scoring ability. And it's very likely that he will attract the attention of European clubs and perhaps clubs in North America later on in the season. Now, let's pour one out for the following 2 teams that won't go further in Libertadores competition. Let's pour one out for Cerro Porteño, who had the strong defense. That's part of the Cerro Porteño DNA. That's really part of the DNA of so many Paraguayan clubs that participate in this competition. But unfortunately, Cerro lacked creativity in the midfield. No players from their side were in the top 100 in either expected goals or expected assists. And they produced actual goals from only 3 players, and only one of them was a starter. At the end of the day, just 1 goal would have put Cerro Porteño in the second place of the group. Now, if you remember, it really came down to away goals. That was the deciding factor between Cerro and Colo-Colo. Let's also pour one out for Alianza Lima. Alianza Lima were a side that were congenitally incapable of finding a winner in group stage play. They had a below average expected goals rate, and their goal conversion rate was 1 sigma worse than that of an average team in the group stage. The final result for Alianza was that they got all their points from draws. They had 4 draws in the group stage and no wins. Yet, they almost achieved an improbable win in Rio de Janeiro versus Fluminense. Kevin Serna and Hernan Barcos were the lone highlights for Alianza. Now, turning our attention to Group B, this was a 2-tier group, and it was very clear who the top 2 teams were: Sao Paulo and Talleres de Córdoba. Both of those teams had nearly identical records. Sao Paulo finished the group with 4 wins against 1 draw and 1 defeat. The difference between the two sides was that Sao Paulo was able to achieve 2 wins on the road. Um, El Tricolor, or Old Tricolor, actually, had the best defensive record in the group stage in terms of expected goals allowed per 90. Um, they had defensive stalwarts such as Igor Vinicius, Wellington Santos, and Robert Arboleda. Their key figures up front were Alisson, Luciano, and Jonathan Cagliari. Now, Tajeres' away record was pretty decent, actually. 1 win, 1 draw, and 1 loss in that final match against Sao Paulo. That draw against Barcelona was actually a good result. That was a match in which they were trailing for a good chunk of the match, a good chunk of the second half, and they got a last-minute equalizer. So that point was actually a good point. Fortunately, because Sao Paulo were able to achieve 2 away wins, that turned out to be the difference. Ruben Bota was Tajeres' best player in the midfield. Ramon Sosa made important contributions, but the leading scorer of the team was Federico Girotti. He led the team in scoring, and he led the team in expected goals, particularly non-penalty expected goals. Now let's pour one out for Barcelona de Guayaquil. They had a number of contributors who produced a lot in terms of generating expected goals, but they produced very little in terms of actual goals. The one exception to that was Damian Diaz. He produced a lot with very little. Of the 10 shots that he was credited with, 3 of those shots resulted in goals. Yet his total non-penalty expected goals were not even in the top 150 of players who were credited with at least 1 shot in the group stage. Federico Vedrisevsky finished 10th in non-penalty expected goals, yet he scored only once. His contribution in actual goal scoring was very little. Barcelona were winless in their first 5 group stage matches, and they were far off the level of Sao Paulo and Tajeres. Cobresal were one of the weaker 4 seeds in this stage of the competition. Their only player of note was Diego Coelho, who was in the top 50 in non-penalty expected goals. They do have a decent midfield. Leandro Navarro, Christopher Macias, Leonardo Valencia. They got points in their first match, and those were the last points that Cobresal would earn in Group B. They lost their last 5 matches in the competition. Now looking at Group C, this was the second tightest group next to Group A. It was a group that took a long time to develop because of those rescheduled matches involving Gremio. And here's where we start to see our first surprise outfit, the strongest, El Tigre of La Paz. They enjoyed a 100% perfect record at home. And they did achieve one important away result, which is that draw in Chile against Huachipato. Now, the key players for the strongest were Luciano Ursino and Enrique Triverio. These were top 10 players in non-penalty expected goals, and overcame the fact that they had midfield composed of players that were not even in the top 150 in expected assists. Now, the strongest liability is that they had very few players who are credited with a shot, fewer than any other side in competition. But they took full advantage of the best home field advantage in world football. Now, it took a while for Gremio to assert themselves at the top of the table, but they achieved 2 away wins to overcome their home loss to Huachipato. Um, I did say at the outset of the group stage that Gremio really struggled to score goals in the absence of Luis Suarez. That proved, in fact, to be the case. No one scored more than 1 goal for Gremio in the group stage. Everton Galdino, Franco Cristaldo were the key goal scorers. Diego Costa, who spent so many years at Atletico Madrid, the former Spain international, proved to be extremely important, particularly in that final and that next to last match against Huachipato. I think that Diego Costa stood out not just for his goal scoring ability, but also through his absence. I think when he had to leave the match against Estudiantes, Gremio's fortunes changed significantly. And in midfield, Gremio have some quality players in the names of Duque Queiroz, Reynaldo, and Jefferson Sotelo. Now let's pour one out for Huachipato. It's extremely unfortunate that Huachipato did not advance to the knockout round. They did the hard part. They achieved 2 away wins in 2 difficult places to earn away wins. In Porto Alegre against Gremio and La Plata against Estudiantes. But their undoing was not just that they scored 1 goal at home, but they happened to play Gremio at home in a match that featured a driving rainstorm. And I think that really inhibited their ability to create goal scoring opportunities. They do have a better than average midfield with Gonzalo Montes and Chris Martinez. Martinez featured prominently in the match against Estudiantes. They have goal scoring ability, have ability to generate goal scoring chances through Maxi Rodriguez and Julian Brea. Unfortunately, no one scored more than a goal for Huachipato in Group C play. Let's pour one out for Estudiantes de La Plata. They'll be back in Copa Libertadores in 2025. But in 2024, their performance was truly maddening. They got sucker punched repeatedly, by the strongest, by Gremio, and by Huachipato. Javier Correa was Estudiantes' best player by some margin. And they enjoyed one of the best midfields in the group stage. And they had the best defensive expected goals allowed in the group. But the shots that they did allow were converted at a very high rate. Across the 32 teams in the group stage, they had the second worst defensive shot conversion rate. So when your opposing teams are converting the few shots that you allow, bad things happen to your team. And it was actually that loss to Gremio, that home loss to Gremio, that really changed the course of the group for them, because they eventually would have to play away at the strongest in La Paz. That ended in a predictable result. They would have had to play at Gremio, but that got rescheduled later. And then the home match at Huachipato ultimately sealed Estudiantes' fate. Now turning to Group D. Okay. Group D was one in which, Group D was one with was also a tight group. We saw the second fewest goals and the second highest draw rate. Um, again, Group D was headed by Atletico Junior. Junior were one of the four unbeaten teams in the group stage of the competition. And that 3-1 win at Botafogo ultimately decided the group. Every other match that Junior played saw them score either one goal or no goals at all. But Junior were helped by the fact that they had the best defensive shot conversion rate across the 32 teams in the group stage. Now, their expected goal leaders were Diver Caicedo, Jose Enamorado, and Carlos Baca. Baca scored 3 goals, 2 of them by penalty. And Victor Cantillo was the leader in the midfield in terms of generating goal-scoring opportunities. Now, Botafogo qualified for the group stage the hard way. I think we all know about their late season collapse in the Brasileirão in 2023, which saw them relegated from position of getting to the group stage directly to having to qualify from the second preliminary round in Libertadores competition. While they got to the group stage, they promptly lost the first 2 matches, so they were up against it in match day 3. And then they won their next 3 matches. So they overcome that home loss. They had a home loss to Junior. They had an away win at Universitario. And they had a knack for finding winners. They achieved a hard-fought victory against Liga de Quito. And they defeated Universitario by playing counterattacking football. So their expected goals and their expected goals against performance was similar to Junior. But Freitas was, in my opinion, the best player for Botafogo in the group stage. And he led the team in expected assists. Junior dos Santos had different fate for Botafogo in the group stage. He scored 8 goals in the preliminary rounds of the competition, and he led the team in expected goals in the group stage, yet only scored 1 goal across the 6 group stage matches. Now let's pour one out for Liga de Quito, who were disappointing in the group stage. I think you're going to hear me talk about this about Independiente del Valle, and that there were individual talent on the Liga de Quito side that was outstanding. They probably could have won matches through their talent. Alex Arce was first overall in non-penalty expected goals. Miguel Estrada was 11th. The total expected goals generated between Arce and Estrada was 6.2. The actual goals that both of them scored, 3. Lucas Piovi was 4th overall in expected assists. Yet this was a side that split home and away against Botafogo. They split home and away results against Universitario, and they achieved 1 point against Junior. So this was a Liga de Quito side that were unable to take their chances. They converted their shots into goals at a 6.3% rate, which is well below the group stage average. And now let's pour one out for Universitario, a side that clearly were not good enough at this level of competition. They finished in the bottom third in expected goals per 90 and expected goals allowed per 90. They do have some quality players in the midfield. I think Andy Polo was the most significant player for them. in terms of generating chances. Williams Riveros, Edison Flores combined generated 2.6 expected goals, which isn't, granted, which is not very much, but between those two players, they scored a total of 1 goal. Jose Rivera was actually the leader for the Cremas with 2 goals. So Universitario demonstrated there's a difference between taking high percentage shots and actually executing all those shots. Now turning to Group E. And Group E was a group in which the top 2 sides were apparent after match day 2. By far the most impressive of the non-Brazilian sides was Club Bolivar. Bolivar, like their Bolivian counterparts, the strongest, enjoyed a perfect record at home. But more significantly, Bolivar achieved 4 points away from home. And they achieved those points in Chile and Colombia. Bolivar are an experienced side in this competition. They advanced to the last 8 of Copa Libertadores last season. And their best player in the group stage has been Francisco da Costa. He was tied for the lead among players in the group stage with 5 goals. He was accompanied by Ramiro Vaca and Bruno Savia. Now, their Achilles heel is that their expected goals allowed per 90 is very high. It's actually the worst of the 16 knockout teams. And the actual goals that they allowed is very high. But they do have that hammer of that home field advantage in very high altitude of La Paz. Now, Bolivar were accompanied by Flamengo. Flamengo have had a high-quality midfield, arguably the best midfield of the Libertadores teams. You have De Arrascaeta, Pedro, De La Cruz, Cebollina. Cebollina also plays up front. But they started Group E play by losing 2 matches in a row at Bolivar and at Palestina. And then Flamengo would go on to win their following 2 matches by a score of 7-0. Granted, both of those matches were at home. Flamengo were furthermore boosted by the return of Gabigol, by the return of Gabriel Barbosa. He didn't feature very much in the group stage. He only played 53 minutes across the 6 matches. I think he was present for really just 2 of them. But the player who was most present and most impactful was Pedro. Pedro scored 5 goals for Rubro Negro in the group stage, and he was 6th in non-penalty expected goals. No other scorer for Flamengo achieved more than 1 goal. Maybe that will be a liability for the Red and Black in knockout stage competition, but they're also a very deep squad, so they can, other players can answer the call when required. And now let's pour one out for Palestina. Chile's Palestino had an expected goals per 90 and expected goals allowed per 90 that ranked in the bottom third of the group stage teams. This was a team that were somewhat less bad than Millonarios. They had a home win against Millonarios, and they achieved a last-minute equalizer. For those 2 reasons, Palestino will play in Copa Sudamericana. They had 3 players in the top 100 of expected goals and in the top 100 of expected assists. Their principal player was Felipe Chamorro, who scored 3 goals in the competition. And Junior Maribel also made important contributions as a defender. Millonarios were a club with one important player, Leo Castro, but essentially no one else. They had no other players in the top 100 in expected assists. Millonarios also stood out as a side whose actual goals were worse than their expected goals, and the actual number of goals that they allowed was worse than their expected goals allowed. They scored multiple goals a total of 1 time in the competition, yet they allowed multiple goals a total of 3 times. So it's not surprising that they had the worst defensive shot conversion rate in the group stage. In Group F, we had one team that was above the rest, and then the fight for second. The first place team was Palmeiras. They were unbeaten, and at one point they had a 4-match consecutive win streak from match days 2 to 5. They failed to win in match day 6, but the result really didn't matter, at least to them. Now, their key player was Rony. They had the best shot conversion rate in the group stage, at least 2 sigma above the group stage average. Now, one liability for Palmeiras is that they had so much high-level talent that their talent has gotten the attention of the major European sides. Endrick was the lead scorer for Palmeiras in the group stage. Endrick will play no more matches for Palmeiras in Libertadores. He's going to play for Real Madrid starting in the summer. They will have the services of Esteval, who will go on to Chelsea in the summer of 2025. But again, top talent leaving these South American sides is something that not just Palmeiras, but every club in Libertadores is going to have to deal with by the time the competition restarts later in the summer. Now, San Lorenzo were basically an average group stage side. They had a performance that was right in line with the average of the teams in the group stage. They were a side that were dead after match day 3, that lost to Liverpool, that really should have been a draw, and then really just comic defending, comic goalkeeping led to a last-second loss at Montevideo. And then they reeled off 2 consecutive wins. They got an important win against Independiente del Valle. They got another win against Liverpool. And then they drew at Palmeiras, which sealed their place in the knockout stage. Now, their important players were Adam Barreiro and Alexis Cuello. Now, the downside for San Lorenzo is that they don't have really a quality midfield, at least for this stage of Libertadores. None of their players finished in the top 100 in expected assists. Now let's pour one out for Independiente del Valle. The Ecuadorian sides have been frustrating the group stage of this season's Libertadores. Perhaps none more so frustrating than Liga than Independiente del Valle. I really expected a lot more out of them. They won their group in last season's Libertadores. They failed to advance out of the group of 16 in a tie that honestly they really should have won. I think they had one of their best chances of advancing to the later stages of the competition. And this season, I think, was an even worse result. When you finish in third place after finishing first, it is obviously, um, a bad result. You know, their expected goals per 90 were better than the group stage average. Their expected goals allowed per 90 was better than the group stage average. They have talent. They have talent all over the field. Ray Baez, Julio Ortiz, Cristian Sabala, um, Michael Hoyos, when he doesn't do brain dead decisions, uh, Lautaro Diaz. Hoyos and Diaz were the chief goal scorers for IDV. Heading into stoppage time in match day 2, IDV were sitting on 5 points. Now, we all know what happened. Palmeiras pulled out a late winner from somewhere. And then Independiente del Valle lost 2 more matches after that, and they were out of Libertadores. So IDV are shaping up to be South America's version of Sevilla. They have demonstrated that they are more than capable of winning Copa Sudamericana. They've almost made that competition their own in the last 3 or 4 seasons. But for one reason or another, they're just not good enough to advance to the later stages of Copa Libertadores. And now let's pour one out for Liverpool de Montevideo. This was a side that was really outmatched. They finished last in the group stage last season. They had a similar result, similar run of results this season. They did achieve 4 points at home. They achieved a draw against Independiente del Valle, and they got that late last-second win against San Lorenzo. But they lost all of their away games. Now, the best players in the group stage were Luciano Rodriguez and Martin Barrios. But of their midfield, only Agustin Cayetano was the only player who finished in the top 150 in expected assists. Now for Group G. Group G was the highest scoring group of these 8 groups. There was one clear winner that emerged from the group. And that one clear winner is a legitimate Copa contender. And the team that ended up finishing in second place was a team that I believe is the best of the second place teams. So let's start with Atletico Mineiro. Atletico were, I think, the best possession team of the 32 teams in the group stage. They were 5th in expected goals per 90. They were 3rd in expected goals allowed per 90. They had the second best shot conversion rate, like more than 2 sigma over the group stage average. And they were very proficient at restricting shots from open play. Now, the lead goal scorer of Atletico was Paulinho. Paulinho scored 5 goals. He was tied at the top in the goal scoring charts in the group stage. Pedrinho was also an important contributor. But I think, I wouldn't say he's lurking under the radar. It's hard for this player to lurk under the radar. But I think Hulk, at the age of 38, has been overlooked to some extent as a creator. Not only did he rank among the top in expected goals, he was also near the top in expected assists. Now, the rest of the midfield is a high-quality midfield. Battaglia, Saracho, Alan Franco. This is the midfield that I believe is the best in the group stage. Bruno Fuchs in defense led a very strong defensive unit. So I think this is a side that can contend for the Libertadores title. They'll be joined in the last 16 by Peñarol. And this is a Peñarol side that I think is not just one of the better Peñarol teams that we've seen recently. I think there's a case to be made that this is the best Uruguayan team that we've seen in the Copa Libertadores in the last 10 seasons. They finished the group stage with a perfect home record. They were near the top over all the group stage teams in expected goals allowed and expected goals per 90. They had the fourth best shot conversion rate. And like Atletico, they were really good at restricting shots from open play. Now, the key players for Peñarol were Maxi Oliveira, who was second in non-penalty expected goals, and Leo Fernandez, who was in the top 10 in non-penalty expected goals, but was also second in expected assists. And if you look at the network, if you look at the passing networks of Peñarol, a lot of the action goes through Leo Fernandez. He had by far the highest connectivity among all the players in the Mania squad. So this is a team that generates a lot of chances. They don't allow a lot of chances, and they're really good at converting the shots that open up to them. So I think this can be a very dangerous team in the knockout stage. Now let's pour one out for Rosario Central. This was one of the teams that I think was really unfortunate not to advance to the last 16. I think if you look at the level of talent of the teams that did not advance to the last 16, I think you could only put IVV and Huachipato as teams that were better than them in terms of talent. They ranked in the top 10 in expected goals per 90 and expected goals allowed per 90. Agustin Movica, Ignacio Malcorra were the key contributors for them. But Central were undone by 3 losses. They lost home and away to Atletico, and they had that critical loss away to Peñarol in the final group stage match. But by far the worst result that they achieved was that away draw at Caracas. As I've said before, any points dropped to Venezuelan teams in the seasons of Libertadores were lost points. And that brings us to Caracas, who were by a significant margin the weakest team in the group stage. They finished bottom of the basic statistics, goals scored, goals allowed, and they were the worst team in terms of expected goals per 90 and expected goals allowed per 90. In fact, if you took all the players that generated expected assists for Caracas over the 6 matches, and you took the sum of those contributions, the total expected assists of all of those players across all 6 matches was 2.4 expected assists, by far the worst total of the 32 teams in the group stage. The only player of any significance for Caracas was Edwin Pernia. And it's possible he could get a look from North American sides. I actually think that he could contribute to some extent in Major League Soccer. But aside from him, Caracas were a really weak side, really insignificant side, and they won't be missed as we advance to the later stages of the competition. And now finally, we look at Group H. Group H was one in which we had one clear winner and then a closer fight for second place. Um, Now, the group stage winner was River Plate, who was a side that was almost perfect. Um, their performance was actually in line with projections, and it's really easy to forget that when you hear all the noise surrounding the team. Their play has been criticized, their manager has been criticized. Yet this is a team that performs in line with offensive and defensive projections. They had the best expected goals per 90. This is a team that had the best expected assists, expected goals allowed per 90. This is a team in which Miguel Borja finished third in non-penalty expected goals. Facundo Colidia finished eighth, and Claudio Echeverri finished 23rd. 7 players on the River Plate side finished in the top 100 in expected assists. Yet, in my opinion, the reason why this team has received a lot of criticism is that they have failed to convert all the chances that have been given to them. I think some of the chances that Borja has missed have been really, glaring chances. You know, Colidio hasn't contributed much in terms of actual goals. Neither has Echeverri. And I think that that inability to that relative inability to convert goal scoring chances is one that could come back to bite River in the later stages of the competition. But River finished as the top seed for whatever that's worth in the knockout stage. And they will host every second leg of the knockout stage ties in which they participate. And it's very possible that they could host the final in Buenos Aires later in November. Um, yeah, so yeah, so this is a side whose performance was almost perfect, but to a lot of fans and to a lot of observers in the press, almost perfect is almost not good enough. But we shall see. So the second place team was Nacional. Nacional of Uruguay. Nacional finished 8th in expected goals per 90, and they finished 11th in expected goals allowed per 90. Leandro Lozano and Gabriel Baez were the leaders in expected assists. Alexis Castro and Gonzalo Carnero finished with 2 goals each. But this is a side that needed more production from Antonio Galeano, who actually led the team in expected goals, but his actual goal scoring production was well off that expected goal figure. And now let's pour one out for Libertad. Libertad Paraguay were below average in expected goals per 90 and expected goals allowed per 90. They lost home and away to River, and they lost away to Nacional. But their worst result was that they were the one team that dropped points to Deportivo Táchira. Libertad really struggled to score goals. They scored, I don't want to say they struggled to score goals. They did score 7 goals in the group stage. But the thing is that they had 7 different goal scorers. All of them scored exactly 1 goal. And it's not a good look when the best goal scorer on the team, the player who is generating the most expected goals, is your 43-year-old captain, Roque Santa Cruz. And it's amazing that Santa Cruz is still playing continental football at this age. He was the oldest outfield player in the competition. But you gotta wonder if this is the last time you'll see Roque Santa Cruz um, playing club football in Copa Libertadores. Remember, this is a player who goes back to 2006, featuring for Paraguay. He played in the 2010 team that advanced to the last eight of the World Cup. Um, so while it's amazing to see him still playing, um, it's not. It doesn't speak well for Libertad's squad that he is still their best threat up front. And then finally, let's pour one out for Deportivo Táchira. This was a team that was the second weakest team in the group stage. And the only reason they're the second weakest team is because the weakest team was also a Venezuelan squad. They were second worst in XG per 90. They were third worst in expected goals allowed per 90. And both of those categories, Caracas FC were bringing up the rear. They had no players in the top 175 in expected goals. And the only player in the top 100 in expected assists was Maurice Gova. But they did take points away from Libertad. And, for Venezuelan teams in the 2024 Libertadores, taking a point off their more established opponents was a significant achievement. And now, if we look at the best matches of the group stage, I think that there are three matches that come to mind, over the last 8 weeks of following group stage play. The first one was Independiente del Valle 2, Palmeiras 3, which is match day 2. Just an incredible match with an unbelievable ending by Palmeiras, and that really started IDV's downfall. And then Estudiantes 3, Huachipato 4. That was a crazy match. If people were not believing Huachipato's ability after they achieved the away win to Gremio, they were definitely believing it in their away win at La Plata. That was really Estudiantes' last gasp chance of really advancing out of the group. But it was a back and forth match. Huachipato won it at the death on basically like an 80-meter counterattack. It took some time to develop, but it ended so beautifully. And it was a devastating defeat for Estudiantes, and it was really just one of the most impressive results that I've seen from a Chilean club in a long time at this stage of Libertadores. And then the other match that stays in my mind is Peñarol 2, Rosario Central 1. That was a tense match for a lot of reasons. It was tense because, the back and forth off the field. I think we all know about the incidents that happened in Rosario in match day 1. So there was a lot of fear of a repeat of that. I think it was just compared to the first two matches that were really high scoring, this was really a competitive back and forth match, and there was a lot at stake. And Peñarol, went out and won the match when it easily could have swung back towards Central. They won the match near the end, and they sealed their presence in the group stage. So those are three matches from this season's group stage of Libertadores that I feel stood out for different reasons. Yeah, so that's the end of part 2 of the Soccermetrics Copa Libertadores show. In part 3, a look at Copa Libertadores represented at the Copa América. Part 3 of the Soccermetrics Copa Libertadores Show, a production of Soccermetrics and Soccer Down Here. So I want to finish up this episode by talking about the players who have featured in Copa Libertadores matches who will appear in this year's Copa America. Now, as you know, Copa America kicks off this week in the USA. And there was a total of 64 players who played in the group stage who are on the Copa America roster. Now, I'm going to go through these. I'm going to go through all the countries that have such players. I think only Jamaica, the USA, and Mexico do not have players from Copa Libertadores sides in their squads. So Argentina only has one player, goalkeeper Franco Armani from River. Peru has 7. Aldo Corso, Andy Polo, Edison Flores, Diego Romero, Jose Rivera, all 5 of those from Universitario, and Carlos Zambrano and Franco Saneglato of Alianza Lima. Chile has 8 players. Paulo Diaz of River Plate, Eduardo Vargas of Atlético Mineiro, Eric Pulgar of Flamengo, and Cristian Zavala, Esteban Pavés, Marcos Bolados, Matias Catalan, and Brian Cortez. Matias Catalan of Talleres, Brian Cortez, all of those except for Catalan play at Colo-Colo. Brazil has 3 players. Endrick, who is still in the books of Palmeiras, but will go on to Real Madrid after the competition. Guilherme Arana of Atlético Mineiro, and Rafael of Sao Paulo. Uruguay have 5 players. That quartet from Flamengo of Jorjan de Arrasqueta, Guillermo Varela, Matias Vinha, and Nicolas de la Cruz, as well as Santiago Mele of Junior. Paraguay have 10 players from Copa Libertadores squads. Ivan Ramirez, Matias Espinosa, Nestor Jimenez, Rodrigo Morínigo and Ernesto Caballero, all of Libertad. Damian Bobadilla of Sao Paulo, Adam Barrero of San Lorenzo, Gustavo Gomez of Palmeiras, who's the captain, Alex Arce of Liga de Quito, and Ramon Sosa of Talleres. Venezuela have 4 players. Noel Fagaresi of Sao Paulo, Jefferson Savarino of Botafogo, Jefferson Soteldo of Gremio, and Miguel Navarro of Talleres. Ecuador has 6 players. Kendry Paez, Moises Ramirez, Joao Ortiz of Liga de Quito, of Independiente del Valle, Janeiro Corozo of Barcelona, Alan Franco of Atlético Mineiro, Alex Dominguez of Liga de Quito. Bolivia has 5 players. Richard Rios of Palmeiras, Miguel Borja of River, James Rodriguez of Sao Paulo, will be the captain, John Arias of Fluminense, and Alvaro Montero of Millonarios. Bolivia stands out with a whopping 14 players from Libertadores clubs in their national team squad. So Carlos Lampe, Jesus Sagredo, Leonel Justiniano, Romeo Vaca, Carmelo Algarañez, Lucas Chavez, Fernando Salcedo, Jose Sagredo, Jomar Rocha, all of those from Club Bolivar. Adrian Jusino, Rodrigo Ramayo, Bruno Miranda, Guillermo Vizcarra, all of the strongest, and Gabriel Villamil of Liga de Quito. And finally, Costa Rica has one player, Juan Pablo Vargas of Millonarios. So if we look at the clubs that are represented in Copa America squads, Club Bolivar lead with 9 players represented in Libertadores in Copa America. Flamengo, Libertad, and Universitario have 5. Colo-Colo, Sao Paulo, and the strongest with 4. Atlético Mineiro, Independiente del Valle, Liga de Quito, Palmeiras, River Plate, and Talleres with 3. Alianza Lima and Millonarios with 2. And Barcelona, Botafogo, Fluminense, Grêmio, Junior, and Sao Paulo with 1 player each represented on Copa America squad. So not all of the knockout stage teams will have players represented for national teams in Copa America. But of those clubs that do, a significant number of those players will be on international TV. And then, after the Copa America concludes, within a month, we'll be back into Libertadores competition. And it'll be interesting to see, particularly for those players who have played close to every minute in group stage play, how they respond to the short break and how they adapt not only to the round of 16 matches, but also to matches in a later stage of the competition. Now, if you want to follow me and you want to send a comment or question, my X handle is @Soccermetrics. You can also send questions or comments to @SoccerDownHere or to Jason Longshore @Longshoe. We'll answer your questions about the tournament in a future episode, and we do appreciate your comments. The Copa Libertadores, will take a break for the Copa America, and this show will do the same. I'll be back in the second half of July to share news about the tournament, answer your questions, and tell a few stories about the tournament's history, and of course, start previewing the round of 16 in August. Whether in person or via television or radio, I do hope you enjoy this summer's national team competitions. The Libertadores will be ready when you turn back to club football. This has been the Soccermetrics Copa Libertadores Show, a production of Soccermetrics and Soccer Down Here. See you later. Hasta luego. Ate más.